Today is June 5th, 2016. We're interviewing Mr. Mackessy for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. We're in Fayetteville, New York. The videographer is Dick Calagiovanni. The interviewer is Joe Messineo. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Could you state your full name with middle initial for the...
Daniel J. Mackessy.
And when were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, 1924.
Okay. What were the names of your parents?
My father's name was James. My mother's name was Mary.
And what did your father do for a living?
My father was like an insurance broker until the Great Depression came, and he had a lot of city employees on his books, and there was no money, and the city paid everybody in script, and you couldn't. No one would accept the script. You could only pay your taxes with the script. So everybody had premiums and annuities and things, and my father says, it'll be over in a short time. So he paid the premiums for about a year or two, till 1933, and then he had a nervous breakdown and everything collapsed.
So the depression hit your family hard.
Real hard, real hard. My mother went in. She had a gallbladder attack, and he had a nervous breakdown. He never worked with paperwork again or anything. He got a job in the steel mills as a mechanic. He couldn't work with paperwork anymore after the nervous breakdown.
And your mom, what did your mom do?
She was born in Marshfield, Wisconsin, in a farming community, and she came to Chicago when she was 18. She worked as a ironer in a laundry, and then she got married to my father.
Okay. Give us a little idea of what you were doing just before the onset of war, as in just before Pearl Harbor. What were you doing? Where were you?
I was in my fourth year of high school, and it was in December when the war was declared, and I always had a job since I was 13 years old. That's when I got my Social Security card. But I was working in a hardware store. It was a very large hardware store, one of the biggest in Chicago. And I worked 40 hours a week, sometimes 48, when I was going to school in my fourth year. So I was in the study hall, and I was trying to get some sleep because I was either working or at school. And I was doing a lot of drafting then for a subcontractor, and I was actually doing all his remodeling, design and everything. And due to that, in the technical courses I took, I got a 5-year scholarship paid for by General Motors. So I had that waiting for me when I got out of high school. And I had started that. I was working at the hardware store, and then high school was over. I went right with General Motors, and I was going to school. And then that December came along, and I enlisted in the Navy because everybody else was enlisting, and my buddy and I, we were afraid we were going to miss all the action if we didn't get in on it right away. So we enlisted, and we went down to Bernie Harlan. He was with the neighborhood. We had a neighborhood. It was known as the Cabbage Patch. It was at St. Brendan's, and that part of Chicago was like Louisiana. We're all Roman Catholic in what parish you were in. So we were in the Irish neighborhood, St. Brendan's, and it was known as the Cabbage Patch because if you weren't Irish, you got out of the neighborhood, And there was about 60 some kids in my block because everybody had 6 and 7 kids in the family.
Sure. What were your thoughts when you first heard that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor? Remember what you were thinking, or were you mad about it?
Well, we were kind of angry at the Japs, and that was a normal sediment, and everybody, if you had slant eyes, they were ready to choke you. And later on, we learned what they did in California. They just swept up whole families, even the naturalized citizens, just because they looked Japanese, and put them on state trucks and buses and shipped them out to the desert and put them in what now we know as concentration camps. There was just a holding camp, but there was no facilities out there. And these were Isis, that was native-born Japanese, and then that's the Isi with the I, and then the Nisi, that starts with an N, that was the American-born Japanese, and their folks were citizens. And one of my best friends after the war, which is kind of odd, he was Japanese, and he was Mandoro Sako, and he was in our dojo. That was a judo club we had, and he was a 6th-degree black belt, and he taught us judo. We worked that.
Okay. So you guys were all pretty upset. How did you happen to select the Navy versus one of the other services?
Well, there was a guy by the name of Frank Bushman, and he was my buddy. And I came home for Christmas vacation. I was going to college. And I looked up some of the fellows, and Frank and Bernie Harlan, there was only a few of us left. So I said to Frank, I said, what's going on? He says, everybody's enlisted. And he said, I've been waiting for you to come home and see what you're going to do. So we talked about it. We said, geez, if we don't enlist, pretty soon we're going to miss the action because the war will be over. We won't be able to get in on it. 18 years old, not much sense. We're going to miss the fighting. So we decided we want to go in the Naval Air Corps. So we went down, took the test, all the physicals and everything, and they said, you passed, so go home and we'll call you now. Well, this was in Chicago, and it was just a streetcar ride away, and it was about an hour from the loop. And we went home, and we waited a week, and no one called. So we called them down, and they said, well, we're not ready to take another group, but there'll be an opening pretty soon, just wait. So we waited the second week, and I told Frank, I said, this guy's just putting us off. He's stalling us. We got to do something. So we got on the streetcar and rode down there and stormed into him and told him there's a war going on and we want to get in on it. And I guess the recruiter says, well, I could send you tomorrow. We said, great, let's do it. So he gave us a bunch of papers. We signed them. And the next day we got on a train in Chicago and they shipped us up to Great Lakes. We get up there and get off the train, and I said to Frank, I says, I don't know how we're going to learn to fly. There's no airplanes here. So I went to tell the quartermaster chief who was in charge of our group, and he said, shut up. For the next 2 weeks, that's all the answer I could get. He'd put his nose right in my face. He'd say, shut up. So we went to the swimming pool to get a swimming test because everybody in the Navy had a swimming pool. Dove in, I swam to the other end, come back. They called me out. They said, where'd you learn to swim like that? And I said, well, I have a senior lifeguard certification from the Red Cross. I was a lifeguard. So they said, okay, how'd you like to be a swimming instructor? I said, you mean I don't have to march all day? Because they found out we were in boot camp. We were just what we call swabbies, the lowest seaman you could get in there. So he said, yeah, you'll be a swimming instructor here. I said, okay, I'll go for that. So I worked there for about 2 or 3 weeks as a swimming instructor, and then I said, I'm going to sit the war out as a swimming instructor. So I went and started complaining to the office, and the guy at the office looked at my records. He says, you were an engineering student in college, right? He said, how'd you like to be a diesel mechanic? I said, you mean I don't have to march all day with the boot camp? He said, yeah. So him and my buddy McClure, they shipped us down to the University of Illinois in Urbana, Illinois. And when we tore down diesel engines and overhauled the injectors on them, the fuel injectors, we learned all about diesel engines and the different engines. And then from there...
Where was Great Lakes located? Where's
Great Lakes is in the northern end of north of Chicago, about an hour or so near Waukegan,
okay,
up there. And it's set in back from the Lake Michigan, but it's a great big flat area. And it's Great Lakes Naval Training Station. It's a very large station. And we went down to Urbana, and there was a whole group there being diesel engineers. And every morning we'd get up, we'd have to run a mile in 6 minutes before breakfast. And if you didn't get it in 6 minutes, you keep running until you got it. And if you didn't get it, you'd miss breakfast.
That's a pretty fast mile.
I know. Well, we're all 18, except one fella. He was 40-some years old, and he was a good mechanic. That's why they took him in. But his name was Willie D. Tweet, and he had more fun with this fella, and he was from someplace down south, but he had a real southern accent. Whenever we'd get in trouble and they'd ask him about it, he'd always come up and he'd say, "Well, I don't rightly know." And that was every sentence he'd start off with that way.
So did he miss a lot of breakfast because of the run?
Yeah, he says, "I thought I may get shot, but they're going to starve me to death." He said, and he was built like Wimpy in the Popeye cartoons, and he had it pear-shaped. He couldn't run at all.
But he knew how to fix a diesel.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go back just for a minute. When you departed for basic training, did your mother or father have any? What was it like? What was it like, the actual?
My mother
departure?
cried, and my father said he understood. He didn't talk much. He was a very quiet man, and he said, "I understood." He said, "I understand what you're doing." Mm-hmm. And mother, being the only kid, she took it hard.
Yeah.
And she wanted to go down the train station with me. And I said, no. I said, you stay home here. I said, I'm not having my mother take me to the train station. So,
yeah.
But she cried when I left.
Yeah, they usually do. So let's go back to basic training, and you're headed into learning how to fix diesels, I believe.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, they give you a diesel engine. They say it don't run. What's the problem? So you'd look at the heater and you'd go through all the steps of it and everything else. And then we got into the injectors, and Bosch we were using a German-style injector. And diesel is very fine, the tolerances and the little pistons in there. So the instructor would hold it in his hand and he'd say, now take it and assemble it. And it wouldn't fit. And then he'd lay it down a little bit and it'd cool off, see? He wouldn't be, in his hand. And then he'd talk to us and he'd say, well, I don't know where you don't grip it right. So he'd pick it up and put it right in the cylinder and it'd fit. We couldn't figure that out. And then they gave us some rags there, and we found out that rags have a lint to them. Mm-hmm. And if any of that lint got on the injector, it'd plug up the injector.
So is that sensitive?
It's that sensitive. So the fuel is sprayed in there very fine, like a mist. So we really learned the ins and outs of diesel engines, because all the assault boats were diesel engines, because gasoline didn't have enough torque on it and everything. So
They're very explosive too, gasoline, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't matter, because on our George Clymer was being built for, and it was going to be named the African Comet, to run from New York to Casablanca in Algiers. And before they outfitted it, it was being built in Louisiana. The war broke out, so the Navy took it over. Well, they wanted to press it in service right away. So the number 3 hole, number 3 cavity in the ship was the swimming pool. It was a luxury liner. So they didn't compartment it off or anything. They just said, well, we'll use this number 3 hole to transport stuff. So they did, and we had the troop support, and that's where they transported aviation fuel.
In the swimming pool.
Yeah, fill the swimming pool up. So we would run with an aviation fuel all the time. And if we ever got hit, that'd be it.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. Very interesting. Tell us a little bit more about the diesel training. How long did they actually have you doing that?
I think it was 4 or 6 weeks. We graduated from there, and then McClure and I, we were buddies. We always stuck together. And in the beginning, you always had a buddy. And I say the beginning because if you lost your buddy, you wouldn't pick up another one.
Yeah. Where was McClure from?
Pardon?
Where's McClure from?
He was a farm boy from Iowa, I believe. And after our diesel training, we were shipped to Chicago, and the train master there in the military was putting groups together to go to the West Coast. So they put the Navy men in one passenger car, and then the Army and Marines in different cars, because if they put the Navy in with the Marines, there'd be a fight all the time. So they'd keep it separately. So there was about 40 or 50 guys, a full carload.
Why would there be a fight? I mean, what was the point of contention?
Well, see, in those days, and this may sound like a fairy tale, but there was known as the Knuckles Club. You ever hear of Knuckles?
No.
Knuckles has been outlawed in England and Ireland for quite some time. And Knuckles was originated by the travelers. And the travelers were the gypsies from Europe migrated to England and Ireland. And the travelers were the English and Irish gypsies. Now the nickname for there was Tinker Tommies. They'd go from one town to the other and say they're going to fix your roof or something, and you know, it was just like our modern day bungalow busters, we call them. But the Tinker Tommies would go, but there was no, for us kids, there was no basketball, there was no baseball or anything. There was no sports like that, except knuckles. And knuckles was bare knuckle fighting. And in the Catholic schools, in St. Brennan's, I started that school in 4th grade. In 4th grade, you were enrolled in knuckles. And what had happened, you'd write your name on a piece of paper and throw it in that box on a Monday, and they'd pick out 2 names, and you were the contestants for the knuckle fight. So you get a guy about your age in class because it was the same grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. Then Friday night, all the kids would go about a block away from school up an alley in Chicago, and we'd have these fights. And
So how did that kind of translate into the Navy and the Marines always getting in fights? I mean, it's just
well,
what they did to pass the time?
there was a lot of kids that, at least from my neighborhood, we were all indoctrinated into knuckles, and that was like a sport, fighting. You know, the Irish, and there was a tavern in Chicago called Isle of Capri, and they say it was known they'd guarantee a fight every night.
Was it a planned fight, or was it just
No, it was
one
just,
broke out?
they'd get in an argument at the bar, and somebody would say something about one of your relatives or something, and it's just as natural, like kids playing ball. It was a sport, and knuckles was bare knuckle fighting.
Yeah, wow. So let's talk a little bit about the accommodations and basic training. How was the accommodations, and what was the food like? How was the food?
I thought the accommodations was great. It was the first time I had a bed to sleep in.
Really?
Because I always had a folding cot. We slept in the dining room. And because that was the only room we had any heat in, we had these hot blast stoves, you know. And even I slept at home until I was 29 years old when I got married. But when I went in service, I had a bunk bed. And I wasn't used to a big bunk bed like that. I was used to that folding cot. And I thought that was great. And then the food, you get hungry enough, you'll eat. And, you know, a salad was raw carrots that were shaved and raisins. That was a salad. And then one meal was beans and franks, you know, navy beans and hot dogs. And then we had a lot of other, I wouldn't call them recipes, like concoctions. They had a piece of toast, and they had chipped beef that was creamed, poured over the toast, and make the toast soggy. And I can't say on camera what we call that, but
Well, there was an initial for that, wasn't there? Isn't it called SOS?
yeah, that's right. You got it.
At any point in the process, did you pick up a nickname? A lot of people seem to in the service.
No, it was just Dan or Mac. But when I went on that train, we get the Union Station down in Chicago, and they're putting the train together. And they called me out, and they said, "You're the train captain." I said, "Why me?" Because we said so.
What's a train captain do?
Well, the train captain has to keep order on the train. And this was full of 18 and 19-year-old kids on this train that they put together. And the doors were locked on each end. You couldn't go from one car to the other. You couldn't get off the train because they would throw the paper bags with sandwiches through the window. And we'd stop at these stations, and Ronald McDonald, or not Ronald McDonald, but it was the guy that had the franchise to feed the troops. And I don't know where he got these recipes from, but they'd make stuff, and the women would throw it through the window, or give it to us the window in paper bags, and we'd have a jug of coffee. And then at the next stop, they would take the empty jugs and give us full jugs. Yeah. But the problem with the train is it was a locomotive, steam-driven. And we started out, and we were in, I forget the naval district, but the dresses were dress blues, the woolen, raw wool Navy uniform. So we all got on the train, we had our dress blues on. Well, they had just a little water compartment there, and we were going, and the first day, guys, you get in and try to do a bird bath. We'd fill up the basin and then splash the water on it, soap up, and then splash the water. So that used up, we ran out of water right away. So I had to put water rationing in. And then they said, "We need more water." And I said, "Where are you going to get more water?" So we'd fill up at each stop.
What time of year were you traveling? Was it warm?
Well, it got warm because we took the southern route. And the problem is, right away, we were hardly pulled out of the station, there was a fight because for the window seats. So I thought, well, there's only going to be one way to straighten this out. I says, the next guy that creates a fight, I said, I'm going to put him on report. He's going to be taken off the train to the next stop, and he's going to go on report. That means a day in the pal shack. Means prisoner at large, and they work the devil out of you. So I said, you're going on report if you have any more nonsense. So we made a deal that every other day we'd switch seats. So you get a seat in the window seat. Next day you get an aisle seat, back and forth, back and forth. So everybody agreed to that. So that settled that. The first night, well, about the second night, it got so hot. The train took the southern route. It went south first. And we had these wool navy blue uniforms on. So we took the jumpers off. We just had our T-shirts on. We were sleeping, sitting up in these wooden slat benches.
Just a wooden bench, no padding.
No padding. And we had the windows open, because it was getting so hot. And the first night, the locomotive, they blew the tubes. Well, I don't know, on a steam engine, they blow the tubes every so often to get the soot out of there. Well, all that soot come back in into the windows. We woke up the next morning, and all you could see was the white of our eyes. We looked like a traveling minstrel show. We're all covered in soot. Everything had a layer of soot on it. Well, and the shortage of water, so I said, no more bird baths. We just had enough to drink, and that was it. Brush your teeth. So we're dirty. T-shirts are all after about 3 days in the T-shirt. And then we would get switched to a siding because they'd have a shipment going out to the coast fast. And we were just replacements, so we were the old train, so they'd put us on a siding until the other trains comes past. Well, they've had us on a siding and a carload of pigs come back. And I said, even the pigs get priority over us. So after about 5 days, we started going through Needles, Nevada, you know, like the Death Valley. We ran out of water. And things were getting pretty gnarly, and I had a lot of trouble keeping the peace aboard, fights and things. And we arrived in Los Angeles and ordered off the train. They said, got to change trains here. So it was late evening, and they gave us 2 sandwiches, but there was no place to go. We went down in the terminal, and even the spots on the floor, guys were sleeping, and all the benches were taken and everything else. So the fellows, about 18 years old, right away, you know, they gathered around, what are we going to do? Well, I still had charge of the group because we were supposed to get another train the next morning and go to San Diego. So I said, we'll go around all the trash cans, get all the newspapers you can. We'll stuff them under our jackets. Because in California, along the coast, it gets cold at night. The fog and dampness rolls in and you freeze to death. So we put the newspapers under our jumpers, you know, and went down to the city park. There was a lot of weirdos in the park and everything else. So I said, we have to stay in a group because there'll be strength in numbers. So we slept in the park that night, and we went back the next morning. They gave us some meal chips for breakfast. We had breakfast. We washed up in the washrooms, bird baths and everything, and got back on the train. And we went down to Mission Beach, California, and trained amphibious training. And they gave us swimsuits and high leather boots like that the Army wore, so our feet wouldn't get cut up. And that was it. And they put us in these landing boats, and we'd go out in the ocean, and we'd practice riding the surf in and learn how to land the boats in the beach. You had to get up on top of the surf and ride in high because there was usually outlining of coral. You'd get over the coral, and then just as you get over the coral and get up close to the beach, you'd have to cut the engine and drop in the trough because you didn't want to go into the top of those crests and the waves all the way to the beach. You get too far off the beach that you can't get back out. So it was quite a knack. So
you're learning to drive was this the Higgins boat?
Yeah, this was the Higgins boat. So there was 3 men to a boat, the engineer, which was the motor machinist, the diesel mechanic, and then you had a coxswain. He drove the boat. And then you had the guy with the bow hooks. He was seaman, and he had the pole with the hook on it. And when you get close to anything, he'd hook like that, and then I would tie up the stern, and coxswain tie the bow up, and the guy on the wheel and throttle, he would run the power of the boat. So it was a 3-man crew boat.
Right. So how long did it take to master that art?
I think it was about 2 weeks. We'd go out at night, we'd get a mile offshore, but you couldn't see. It was a blackout, and there was a submarine scare on the west coast. They thought they were going to be invaded by the Japanese, and so it was you couldn't see the shoreline, and it was a blackout. So we had a little compass like this, like you used to see in a car. It was a little magnetic compass, you know, but waves in the rough weather, it just spin. So what you would do, you would follow the lead boat. And when you're in salt water, especially close to shore where the salt density is higher, it leads like a phosphorus wake. The prop churn up the water, and that you get a white streak in the water. So we'd follow that white streak. We'd all go down in line. And then we had the lead boat that was the instructor in it. They would start a circle, and we'd line up, and we'd all charge the beach at once and get on the crest of the wave and land. and it was down around Baja or someplace like that. We'd go down and overnight and practice these night landings, and then come back the next morning.
And when you formed those circles, how many vessels would be in a circle?
It depends upon how big an invasion it was. Usually it was about maybe 6.
So there'd be multiple circles, and then,
Yeah, multiple circles.
then they would, on some command, they'd straighten
And then,
out.
and
they'd
then
all-
you would, they didn't run by radio then. They had signal flags. And they'd throw up certain signal flags that may be lined up. So when you'd make a beachhead, there'd be the first wave, second wave, all the way, maybe even 7 waves. And there'd be a cruiser or a heavy-duty ship up there at the first to try to shoot up anything on shore that was opposing this beachhead, any shelling that comes up. But the biggest problem is when you go to land, the Japanese would come out. They had a knee mortar. It was like a saddle that goes over the knee, and they'd drop a mortar in there, and they'd shoot that thing, and they'd get the first shot. They'd see where it landed, and they'd get the range. And these fellows, you know, they had years of experience in China. And these fellows with the knee mortars, they were accurate as
So
hell.
they could hit a Higgins boat?
Yeah, a lot of hits on the Higgins boat. And then, you know, they'd lose power or something, and then they get washed up in the coral. They get hung up in the coral. They couldn't get a boat in there to get them. So me being in the swimming, and the diesel mechanic, as luck would have it, I got assigned to go in and get those boats with another fella. And McClure, he was my buddy, and we'd get the swim fins and we'd swim in with a tow line, and then we'd climb aboard, and I'd try to get the diesel started, but usually the kid that was running them, he'd run the battery down, so they'd be dead. It's a court-martial offense to start a fire in an open boat. But, you know, I'd say, well, court-martial me and get me out of here then. But I used to take a rag and I'd dip it in the bilges where there was a lot of oil. I'd drape the oil over the intake, the air intake, and I'd light it. And it would suck that hot air in there, and it just turn the diesel over, you'd pop off right away.
Where'd you learn to do that? Did you think that up, or?
I don't know where I exactly learned it, but I used to use that.
I guess so. All right, let's go back. We're going to come back to that, but let's go back to training. Just give me a snapshot. How did you adapt to the physical regimen and the military life that was also new to you?
We were going out there, and we said our job is to kill Japs. That's what we wanted to do. And I know we had one fellow in our group. His name was Rusty Welsh. He was from Boston. He had that real Bostonian accent. And when we first, the first beach we hit was Guadalcanal. And let's back up.
Let's go back to San Diego.
Yeah, all right,
You're practicing down there, so let's keep
We got
stepping
through
through
with
it.
the practice in San Diego on the surf. It was about 2 weeks or so. And then they shipped us to Treasure Island, which was, it was right behind Alcatraz in San Francisco Bay. And that's where the A train, remember Johnny Mercer, I'm going to take the A train? That's where the A and B train ran. And that ran from San Francisco over to this Treasure Island, we call it. And then from there, it had a dog leg, and there was another train that went over to Oakland. That's the way they got across the bay, in the inner bay. The outer bay is Golden Gate Bridge, but this is a much longer span. And it was broken up into 2 spans. Well, that island is where they housed us before they shipped us overseas. So they didn't have to have a barricade or guards or anything. They just shipped us over to the island, and that was it.
So you didn't get any time off or
Well,
shore leave?
they held us there for about 2 weeks. And they had work details, keep busy every day, so they wouldn't get in trouble. But I don't know why I seemed to get picked on again. they put me on shore patrol.
Were you bigger than most of the guys?
No,
or-
no, I was just a little scrappy runt. I was maybe 140, 150 pounds, but I was 5'10", 10 and a half. And over the years, I've shrunk a little. I'm 5'8" now. But they gave me a shore patrol. We had a white uniform because that was the uniform of the day in California. And I had leggings on and an armband that said SP for shore patrol. And they didn't give us a sidearm there. They gave us a billy club. So my beat was one city block. I didn't cross the street, I just patrolled that one city block. And I'd go, I think it was 4 or 8 hours a shift. So I'd get dressed up every day, and in the evening, I'd go over there. And luck would have it, again, I got the red light district. So I'm patrolling this, one night I'm patrolling, and a kid comes up to me, Navy kid, didn't have his hat on, and I stopped him. I said, "You're out of uniform." He said, "Let me tell you what happened." I said, "I went into that lounge up there, the Pink Pussycat Lounge." I said, "Yes." He says, "I bought this hostess a drink in there. They charged me $20. He said, "I only had $40. I bought her one drink, and I passed out or something. I think whatever happened, I don't know. I passed out, and I woke up in the alley without my hat, and the other $20 is gone." So I got rolled in the place. So I says, "Well, we're going around the block in the next loop, come along," and I said, "I'll go in and talk to the manager." Well, as I'm coming up to the Pink Pussycat around that side of the block, 2 more guys come up and tell me the same story. Well, then a lot of as they're telling me, some other sailors come down the street, and they were shipmates to these guys. Before I knew it, I had a gang of 20 servicemen there. So I said, "Well, let me go back and I'll talk to the manager, see if we can get your money back, and maybe your hat is laying around there someplace." So we went back, and I went in, and I walked into this place and asked the guy where the manager was, and they pointed him out. And I went over there, and I told him, I said, "This is a terrible thing to do. These guys are going to be shipped overseas." And I said, "Some of those guys are survivors from the Lexington that was sunk sea. They're going to be reassigned." And I said, "You should really give them their money back and everything." He said, "Get out." I said, No. I said, "You can't do that. I'm shore patrol." He says, he called the bouncers over. He says, "Out." So I said, "You sure you want to do this?" He said, "Yeah." So I walk out, and being my nature kind of scrappy, I gets outside and I says, "I don't think I can get your money back or your hat." I said, "But we can see to it that no one else gets rolled in this place. So we're not going to get your money, but you're going to get satisfaction. So let's go in there and see that they put them out of business." So we all stormed in. As soon as we come through the door, the bouncers, about 3 or 4 bouncers, big guys come up. About 5 or 6 guys jumped on each bouncer. Next thing I know, the chair goes through the air, and someone threw something in behind the glass bottles and the mirrors behind the bar, broke it, smashed everything in the place. And they called up the military police, and they come down with the state trucks. These are the professional military police, the Army, and they rounded us all up and threw us in the state trucks, and they hauled us over into the Chinatown jail, the drunk tank, and threw us in there. So the next morning, we got up, and they marched us before the judge, local judge, and again, I was appointed the spokesman, and I told the judge what happened. He listened to me, and he said, "Didn't get your money back, huh?" I said, "No." He said, "All right." He says, "Well, here's your sentence, punishment." He says, "You're all going to go in and get a shower and a good breakfast, and then they're going to drive you back to your ships, our station." And he says, "And behave yourself. Good luck." And out we went. I get back to Goat Island or Treasure Island. We had 2 names for it. And McClure is still in the barracks. Now this is about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. I get back to the base. I got all blood on my white uniform and everything all tore up. And I said, what are you doing in the barracks? Why aren't you out on work detail? He said, we're shipping out today. Oh. He said, let me tell you what happened to me last night. I met this girl. And I says, where are we shipping out to? He said, I don't know. And then he started telling me about the girl again. Well, I guess that's the first date he ever had. You know, he's a 19-year-old kid farm boy. And he starts telling me how wonderful she was, and he fell in love, and when he gets out, he's going to get married to her and all that. And I said, well, what time are we shipping out? He said, I don't know. They just told us to pack up and get ready. So I said, okay. So I changed the uniform, and I start packing up, and he starts talking about this girl again. And he kept it up, and we got packed up, and they told us to fall out and mustered us. See, we were all there and marched us down to the docks and put us on a ship. And it was destined for about 1,500, but they got about 2,000 troops on it. And we didn't know where we were going or anything, and we take off. And the bunks were 6 high. Well, as soon as we got out towards the continental shelf, you know, it gets that rolling effect out there. And the guys start getting seasick. And it got so bad below decks, the smell and everything, all those guys vomiting. And I said to McClure, I says, grab a blanket, we're going topside. So we went topside, and we slept on the deck because there was no room. Everybody was sleeping topside because below, it was such a mess below.
Did you have trouble with seasickness?
I got a little easy at first. And if it gets tough enough, you're going to get seasick. I was in a typhoon with over 100 and some mile an hour winds for 3 days. And everybody was seasick.
Yeah.
But that,
What was the nature of the ship? Was it a former passenger ship? What kind of ship did they put you on?
it was an old cargo ship.
So you had a cargo ship. They just put a bunch of bunks in it then.
Yeah, they just put these pipe bunks, you know, you take 1-inch pipe and the fittings together and make a rectangle out of them. They put a piece of canvas that put grommets in it and put rope around it, lace it, tie it up tight, and take topside and hose it down with salt water and dry it in the sun, and it'd get tight like a drum. You throw it on that, and then you had a pad about that thick that was in your sea bag that you were transported with, and you would sleep on that. But we were on that ship, and they had a desalting. That's how they made fresh water. But there was never enough fresh water to go around. So they'd run the desalters, and then the water would be running out, so they'd cut the cycle on the desalting. There was a lot of salt in it. And if you drank a lot of that water, you get dysentery, you know, because of all the salt. And I noticed as we were going out, we didn't have no escort or anything. There was no arms, no guns or anything aboard the ship to protect us. So to keep out of the sub
Lanes.
veins and things, we ran down along the coast of South America. And I noticed the sun would always come up on our port side. That means we were heading due south. And then after a couple of weeks of that, we started heading west. And all this time we're out of sight of land. We didn't know where we were. And all of a sudden the sun was off our stern. Now I knew we were heading west. So we headed west, and we scooted around the Fiji Islands and everything, and Tahiti and all that. And the outermost island in that circle range was Christmas Tree Island. We didn't see sight of that. And then we came into New Caledonia. New Caledonia was a French colony. And the French had given us privilege to have that as a stopping off place, and we used that as a transfer station. So we were 31 days, I think, at sea. And 2 meals a day. We get a couple of slices of bread with 2 hard-boiled eggs and a cup of coffee for breakfast. And then we'd get the SOS at night or something, and beans and franks or whatnot. And all we had was salt water for showers. You'd get sticky with that. But the ship wasn't accommodated with enough heads, toilets. So they had a big rain gutter on the starboard side and the aft end of the ship. And they had a salt water pump that pumped water in that rain gutter, and it ran continually, and then the rain gutter would dump the waste right over the side. So the trick was, when you had to relieve yourself, you go up there and you kind of get over that rain gutter, and you'd hold on the side like that. Well, when the ship would roll to the starboard, you'd roll back and you'd sit down in the gutter, and that water would come down, Well, you learned to sit down, and you'd put one hand in between your legs on the front of the rain gutter and another on the back of the rain gutter. So when the ship would go forward, all the water would be forward. You'd build up the water forward, and then when the ship would rise, the bow would rise, all that water would come down. Well, if you didn't rise up, you'd get a saltwater rinse. Well, that rushing water. So that used to be our amusement. We'd go up there and sit there and watch these guys get dunked and everything else. You could sit down in that mess and all that. So, and then they'd play cards, and tell stories, but hang out on deck.
What was the mix of the people? Were they all Navy, or were there some Marines or other? What?
It was mostly Navy, because the military, MacArthur had control of the whole situation, see. And when the Philippines fell, he left Manila, and he left Wainwright in charge for the Bataan March and Corregidor and everything. He was there, he was captured, and he was the guy but MacArthur was known as the Peacock. So he got his whole family on a PT boat with an armada around him to protect them, and he ran down the coast of the Philippines down to Australia. He sat the war out in Australia. And then when we invaded the Philippines, then he came back, the Philippines. But we arrived in Noumea, and as we pulled in Noumea, there was a big building, biggest building in town, and it was all painted pink. And some of the guys that were from the Lexington, they knew what the pink buildings were in the French colonies, because prostitution was legal. And they'd allow the servicemen to go into this pink building, but you had to be in dress uniform. But after going down there and look at the local population in Noumea, and you didn't know what breed or if they were human or what, we were afraid to go near the place, because the Navy put such a still on us about venereal disease and everything in the islands. So
A lot of guys have that problem?
some of the guys went, but some of us had better brains than that. But we were put on a work detail each day until our ship came in. And I had pilots working detail with me. And we were living in tents because there was no housing for us down there. We had these, they told us they had Quonset huts, but they dumped the steel off, and then the rains came, and there was about 6 or 8 inches of water, and the steel was in the mud behind that, below that. So we were told, go in and get that steel out of there. So we went in there, and you couldn't pull it up. So we said we had to drain the water. So we dug ditches. All morning we dug ditches, tried to drain that field. And it would fill up all the time. So we said, there's a stream coming in here. So we went to the other side, hiked around the other side, and we went up the ravine to see where all this water was coming from, see if we could divert it. And we got stopped by a French police up there, like a patrol. And they come along and they said, what are you doing here? And we told them. And they said, well, have you had contact with any of these people in these tin shacks up on the sides? We said no. There was women up there waving us, screaming at us, and the guy would say, we should go up there, and something told us not to. We didn't right after that, these French police come along, and they wanted to know if we had contact with any of those people. We said, no, why? They said, well, right now, you're on the irrigation ditch, the storage ditch, for the leopard colony.
Ooh.
So he says, we didn't know at that stage of leprosy, it wasn't contagious, but this was a quarantine camp. So if you had contact with them, you get locked up. The quarantine period was 7 years. If you didn't have leprosy, they'd let you go. If you had leprosy, you stayed.
It's an old-fashioned lepers colony,
Yeah.
as they call it.
So we got out of there, and then on the way back, we stopped and we were going to go swimming because it was so hot. So some of the guys jumped off and ran down the beach, got undressed, and ran into the surf, and they started collapsing. Well, we didn't know it was on the lee side of the island. And the jellyfish from the current gets washed in there. And they got a jellyfish that's about 4 to 6 inches in diameter. It's clear, you can almost see through it. And the guys ran in, they stepped on these jellyfish that were floating in the water. And jellyfish sting you. They got barbs on them. And they throw a barb into you about that deep. It's like a black streak, and it festers. Painful as the devil. So we hauled the guys out, and they couldn't walk, and loaded them in the truck and went back, put them in sick bay. But then we were assigned as replacements, and that's how I got assigned to the George Clymer. We went aboard this ship, and it was a full load of crew of the ship, and the amphibious crew to man the boats. And it was a George Clymer, my first ship I was assigned to. I was with the amphibious force, transported on that ship. And I was in ship's company, though. I was assigned to the assault boats. And after 30-some days at sea and all the time at New Caledonia, Noumea, McClure was still talking to me about this girl he met in San Francisco. And I was getting deaf on one ear listening to him about that, you know. I was kidding him about that. I said, boy, she's getting older by the day, and she's probably got about 15 sailors now she's met. You've been away for so long. And we were all ribbing him, and that's all he had in his mind was this girl. So they told us, some of the fellows started getting apprehensive, you know, we're going to go into battle and all that, and we're going to go up to Guadalcanal. And they said, don't worry about it, the canal is secure. We're not even going to have any support. We're going to go in there just 3 troop ships. So we went up the slot that night. And the slot, they called it Iron Bottom Bay because there were so many ships sunk there. There was a Guadalcanal on one side, Talogi on the other side, and at the head of the slot was Bougainville. And all the transport, it was like the inner sea, and the slot maybe be big as Oneida Lake is wide. We'd run up back and forth in the slot to supply it. And that night, before we hit the beaches, in the middle of the night, off our port side there was a big explosion, and the other troop ship got torpedoed. And it was a big ball of fire with the full troops and everything. They sunk, no survivors. So dawn the next morning, we, George Clymer, and the other ship was the American Legion, an old troop ship from World War I. And that didn't have any of these seal-tight compartments or anything. So the subs came in, and they, as we're going to make the invasion and get close to the beach, they got torpedoed too. So the captain couldn't get all the boats in the water and couldn't get the crew up because they were sinking so fast. So he just put full ahead, and he ran it right into the beach in the shallow water so the men could have a chance to swim ashore. Mm-hmm. So out of the 3 ships, we were the only one left. So we landed. And, not landed, but we got close enough to shore to disperse our troops and start unloading. And they told us, don't worry, everything's secure. Well, MacArthur was supposed to supply the Air Force. We didn't get no planes in the air. Close to 100 Jap planes come in and strafe the beach as we were unloading and try to run back and forth. And they strafed us all day long like that. So we got through with that invasion. We picked up the wounded, and we ran them down to the Guadalcanal. And they were loaded up, all their MASH units, and the tents were loaded with the wounded from Guadalcanal. So they said, you make the trip and take them down to New Zealand. New Zealand, south of Australia, you know. So that would be a 2-3 day run. So we ran down there, loaded our troops, and man, oh man, we pulled into the docks and all the screaming and yelling. We were one of the few American ships that ever put port in there, see, after the war, or during the war. And all the males in New Zealand from 18 to 45 were shipped to North Africa because it was an English colony. They stripped all the males out of New Zealand. So we came in, there was a sea of women down there to greet us. Well, that was pretty hard to take, you know. So we went ashore, and being sailors, the first place everybody would head for the bars. And we go down the main street, and I think it was Wellington, North City. Or no, Auckland was North City, Wellington was the South City, but we're still on North Island. And South Island, they didn't get electricity until the 1960s. That's how far back they were. But when we got down there, on the main street, they had these bars. You see a big sign, bar. I was going to go in and get a drink. So they had like a storefront, like garage door. They would open up, be like an awning, and then there'd be a bar there with a rail that you put your foot on, elbow up to the bar. They served big steins there of milk, warm milk. We walked in, they served us milk, and we looked at that, and these great big burly guys there drinking steins of milk. And the milk was like cream down there, you know, they don't separate it. And we said, you couldn't get a drink in town, so they had these tea rooms like in the hotel, and you couldn't go in. It had to be an open table. There was no bar in there. You couldn't get served, or they wouldn't let you in unless there was an open place to sit at these 2- and 4-place tables. And we found out that's where all the women went. So we'd go into there, and the only thing you could drink was wine. And then they close up at 6 o'clock.
6 p.m.?
At 6 p.m. We'd say, that's a funny time to close. So we found out they would sell us a bottle of wine in there too. So we'd take the wine, and we'd wrap it in a towel or a blanket. We'd take a towel or a blanket ashore, wrap it in there, you know, and we'd walk down the main street, and we'd have that wine in the bottle, and the ladies down there would see us, you know, and before you know it, we're off up into the park.
So now you got friends.
But we had a good time in New Zealand, but we stayed after we just unloaded, and then they'd load us up with fresh eggs. You could get a steak that big down there with these great big homegrown tomatoes, these jumbo tomatoes, and you get about 6 big slices of those tomatoes, big T-bone steak hang over the platter, and you get a pitcher of milk and a loaf of bread with a big brick of butter, and then some vegetable, and that was their meal.
Pretty good. All right, so so you went back with a full load of provisions.
Yeah, we had provisions for about 2 weeks. We had fresh eggs until we ran out, and you know, We had mutton, because there were a lot of sheep down there. And a lot of butter and bread. We had fresh provisions for about 2 weeks, and then we went back on the rations and whatnot, rice and.
Let's talk about the nature of that vessel you're on. Can you describe the George Clymer a little bit more about its purpose and kind of what
the George Clymer was a single screw, and the drive shaft, the shaft to go to the propeller, was about 2 foot in diameter. It was a big screw. It was about 10, 12 feet in diameter, and it was high pressure steam. Single stage turbine, and it was 8,500 horsepower, 8,500 horsepower. And the ship, the length of it was 489 feet. The beam was 69 foot across the beam. The draft, it drew 27 feet, fully loaded. The speed was a little over 18 knots. At top speed. We had 4 3-inch guns on it, 2 45 millimeters and 8 20 millimeters. The crew was 512, and the accommodations for the troops were 1,300, but sometimes we took up to 2,000. Most of the time, we'd pick up, drop off, and keep island hopping, going up with the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion. And when we pulled the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion out of Guadalcanal, we were going to get ready to make the invasion of Bougainville. And who comes aboard but Bernie Harlan?
Tell us about Bernie.
Well, I was with Bernie since 4th grade in grammar school. And he came in off Guadalcanal, and he had malaria real bad. And he come aboard, he was yellow, and color of his skin. So I knew he had malaria, so I went down and got a lot of quinine pills in the first aid station. And electrician could get anything they wanted aboard ship. Because if you crossed electrician, he would go down, pull the switches on the vent fans. You'd suffocate. So that was a favorite trick in the galley. We'd go down, we'd say, what do you got to eat? And they'd give you the best they had. Otherwise, you'd go pull the vent fans on them. So anyway, I could get Bernie, and we made up what we call a gidunk bag. Any good stuff we'd put in this bag. So I'd make him that. And then I'd sneak him into, after I got to be ship's company, I'd sneak him into the crew's quarters at night so he'd get a freshwater shower. They'd turn the showers on for the midnight watch coming off for about an hour or so, and I'd sneak him in with that crew. And I'd get him a freshwater shower because they go for weeks, months without a shower, you know. It'd rain every day. They'd get out and they soap up.
And he was in the Marines?
He was in the 2nd Raider Battalion. When he enlisted just before I did in Chicago. He was on the next block. He went to the same grammar school I did, and he was one of the gang. And he was a tall, lanky kid, real scrappy. And they shipped him to Camp Pendleton. Took his Marine training there, shipped him right over to Guadalcanal. He never got a liberty, and he never got a chance to wear his dress uniform. So after Guadalcanal, went up to Bougainville, picked him up. And at Bougainville, the Japs used a different theory. They used to, Guadalcanal, they kind of put a big offensive when you were landing. But Bougainville, we got the first wave ashore. McClure was in the boat right next to me in the lineup. We were the first wave we hit the shore. And they didn't do much. We didn't feel no opposition. We thought this was going to be easy landing. So we pulled out. as soon as we pulled out, the Japs put a big offensive in. Really hit them hard on the beach. So we went back to get another load of troops to bring them in. Well, then the subs moved in, so the fleet says the troop ships get underway.
The subs from which side?
Japanese.
Okay.
So they got to pick up on sonar. The subs were moving in, and so they told us we got to get underway so we wouldn't be a sit and duck target. So we got underway, and then the guys on the beach, they start radioing back that they were being overrun, and they were running short of ammunition and everything, and they wanted some reinforcements. And here we're running up and down the beach so we wouldn't get hit with subs. So the captain says, the hell with the subs. He says, those guys on the beach, we're not deserting them. So we slowed down, but we unloaded while we were underway, more or less.
Tell us about the process of unloading. The ship carried troops and its vessels, the Higgins boats?
Yes. What the thing is, we had booms and Welland-Davids. On the sides, we had these Welland-Davids, and there would be 2 of these wooden boats in it, and there'd be like a hoist that would, on a track, and it would go up over the side, and then on pulleys, it'd lower the boats into the water. And just before you hit the water, they'd start the engine and then cast off. And then you go around, make a circle, and you come in where the landing nets were. You'd pull up the landing nets, and the troops would climb down the landing nets and get into the boats, either jump in or fall in. Or
how'd that work out? I mean, sometimes the water was a little bit rough, and tell us about the actual process.
They got banged up. They got banged up, and some would come crashing into the boats and everything else. And but we used when you're going along like that, and you're getting, if you can pull up, we'd unload on the lee side. So the current and the waves be coming in on the starboard side, and we load on the opposite side, say the port side, and that would be kind of calm water. But still you get the surge coming in and up, up and down. But it would be banging and slamming and everything.
Did you ever lose a guy between the boats, or one drowned, or?
No.
So they did pretty good at getting them in there.
Everybody had, you could time it just about, and when it would, you wouldn't want to jump in when it's coming up.
Yeah.
Because you'd get the coming up and the going down, it's too much of a forced landing. So you waited coming up, and there was an instant just before it went down, you jump.
Right when it was kind of weightless almost, right?
Yeah, you get into zero gravity just about there. It's the top of its peak, and just as it's going down, you jump down. But a lot of times, they come in, and the troops would have up to 40 to 60 pound pack on their back. So a lot of them would throw the pack in and then come down, and as long as you got in the boat, you were one piece.
And about how many men would the boat carry?
40 to 50 or so. You get in a boat. They were just shoulder to shoulder in the boat.
Were you also responsible for bringing in any munitions, or did a different vessel do that?
Then if we get all the troops in, we usually get that the first day. Then we'd maybe unload all night. Then you start bringing the jeeps, and we could bring, and then we had what they call LCMs. There was 2, it was a twin screw, and we had 2 of these big boats that would take a small General Sherman tank. We'd put the tank in those boats, lift the tank and the boat up in one unit, put it over the side, and take it ashore. But there was no docks wherever we landed. There was no docks.
Always beaches. You had to rely on the beaches.
No docks, no trestles or nothing. It was always landing on the beach.
How well were the waters charted relative to shoals or coral reefs, or was it just feel as you go?
Well, Australia and New Zealand, there was guys that used to be timber sellers and gem sellers and things, and they were like prospectors. They go around these islands, and they'd live on the islands in huts or so for a month, and then they go back home. But these guys were rough and tumble guys, and they set them up as spotters on the beach. They'd go up in the mountains or so, and they'd go down at night, and they'd do the reconnaissance. They'd swim out, and they'd see where the barricades are and the beaches for the landing craft to get hung up on. And A lot of times we didn't have charts.
So were there man-made barriers as well in some cases?
In some places, very interesting.
What did they use?
Usually,
Describe that.
the problem is, it's usually got a ring of coral around it. And I don't know, I can't even think of places where we didn't have coral.
Did they ever have to destroy some of the coral by torpedoes or other methods? You just hope to go over it? Or?
When we went into Guam, they shelled that place. I didn't think there'd be anything to float anymore. We were laying offshore, going back and forth, waiting for the invasion and to start. And they wanted to soften it up because this was the first piece of land that we took back that was U.S. territory before the war, was Guam. And it was our furthermost outpost in the Pacific. And it was all reinforced concrete. We had put these.
We had put in there.
We had put in there. So we know the Japs were using that. And then unbeknownst to us, the Japs had a method of making concrete from salt water. Nobody knew how they did it. And there was one engineer that knew how they did it. And he'd made a lot of these structures in the islands with concrete. And nobody else could do it because we couldn't get the fresh water to make the concrete. But he had figured out some way to do it.
I never realized you couldn't make it with salt water, and he obviously figured it out.
Yeah, you can't make concrete with salt water.
All right, so you're I think Bougainville, what would be next in order after Bougainville?
Well,
and if that's all you want, I mean, there may be more you want
well,
to tell us about
Bougainville-
Bougainville as well.
Bougainville was kind of a turning point for me. We went into the second wave, and they wanted to isolate the troops, so we really put a lot of opposition in the second wave. And we got back to the ship, come back to the ship for another load, and it was lunchtime. So we'd pull in, one man would scunter up the landing net, run down the galley, get some brown bags of lunch and a jug of coffee, and run back. We'd tie the coffee on here, throw the brown bags in the boat, go down there, and then we'd eat while we were running back and forth. So we come in for lunch, pulled in, and McClure both was always right behind us. We were like in a group. And he pulled in behind us. And I run up the net and I go down the galley, get the sandwiches, bring them back. And I noticed McClure is kneeling down in his boat. I thought they must have run some coral. I poked a hole in the bottom or something. He's kneeling down. He's looking like into the floorboards. And I throw the sandwiches down, and I yelled back, "Hey, McClure, you want me to get some chow?" And the guy, coxsman running the boat in the bow hook, went like that. So I thought they didn't hear me. So I ran aft, so I was right over them. And I yelled down. I said, "You want me to get some chow?" I went like that. And then just there I see the boom coming over and the wire basket going down. And I looked down there, and there was a corpsman in it, a corpsman ran down the net and jumped in the boat. And I looked at the boat, and McClure is still kneeling down there, and they rolled him over to put him in the basket. His helmet stayed down on the deck, and the top of his head was in his helmet. When they rolled him over, his brain spilled out.
This is McClure? Take your time.
At that time we realized that it wasn't all gung-ho and a lot of fun. It got pretty serious. So I went down the boat and we kept unloading. I came back aboard and I went right to my bunk and slept. And got up the next day and I couldn't sleep for about 3 days. So I walked the passages at night. And I see the notice up on the bulletin board. It says, ship's crew wanted electrician's mate. So I said, I got to get out of these landing boats, because it dawned on me we were replacements, and already we were looking for replacements. And this is Guadalcanal was not that bad, but Bougainville was a slaughter. So I thought of the map, and I thought, all these islands we got to hop, we'll never make it. And in those days, there was no tour duty. You went out there, and the only way you got back home was in a body bag, or if you lost an arm or leg. And there was a lot of conversation, which would be the best, to lose a foot or lose an arm or something like that. And more or less kidding, but they're pretty serious. And guys were considering it. And so I seen this sign, and next morning I went down to the ship's office, and I said, what's that sign all about? He said, well, we're short of electricians. We only got 2 electricians aboard this ship, the chief and another. And he says, they're standing 12 on and 12 off, 2 watches. We got to have a guy in the engine room. We got nobody, day electrician to fix anything aboard. So desperately need electrician. So in my mind, I said, I'm an electrician. I built a buzzer in high school, 6-volt buzzer. So he said, you electrician? I said, yeah, I know electrical work. He said, go down to the engine room. He showed me how to get down there. And he said, there's a chief electrician on watch down there. Talk to him. So I go down there, and I looked around the engine room, and I see the chief there. And I said, you chief electrician? He said, yeah. I said, well, ship's office sent me down here, the yeoman did, and I told him I was an electrician. And he's you electrician? I said, oh, yeah. He showed me how to test a fuse. And had a Wiggy's tester. I showed him, okay, here's what you got to know. He says, this ship wasn't built for wartime. He says, these breakers drop out. He's when we get an air miss or a concussion or a shock wave comes through where there's explosion in the water. Mm-hmm. So as these breakers drop off, and we lose the power for the steering and all that. So he says, when they say general quarters, you got to take these 2x4s, and they're numbered. And you put them underneath and hammer them in these switches so they can't drop out. They had a whole bunch of 2x4s in this box. So he says, that's what you got to do. And he says, then there's 40 to 60 pumps around here, and you got to take the reading on them each hour. And you got to log them here.
The reading would tell you what, gallons?
The temperature.
Temperature of the pump
itself? Of the bearings, run them, you got to take the temperature. And you got to check the water on some pumps. And makeup water, for the steam pumps and whatnot. And you got to go down the shaft alley and feel all the bearings on the main shaft, drive shaft, see if they're not overheating, and all the grease cups are filled and everything. Mm-hmm. So every hour you got to make the rounds and log it in there. It was hot as hell down there.
What was the name of this ship?
That was the George Clymer.
Okay, so you were just changing assignment on the same vessel.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they said, you'll be ship's crew when we're underway. But when we make the landings, you go back in the boats.
It didn't work out.
So, but then I took the test, and I made, I had a second-class motor machinist, so they said, well, you'll have to start off with third-class electrician. I said, I'm not going to take a cut in pay. So they said, all right, take the test, and if you can pass the second class, we'll give you second class. So I got the books out, and I read all I could, and I figured out, I took the second class test, and I passed that, so they made me a second class electrician. Then later on, I got first class, and then chief. Mm-hmm. So when we were underway in general quarters and everything, I'd be ship's crew. And then the landing, I didn't have to go into the first wave anymore, but what I did have to do is be in charge of salvage boats. Get all these boats off the beach. So we spent a lot of time in the water.
And these are the
in.
boats that had trouble, correct?
Yeah, they got hung up on reefs or got hit. So sometimes the Marines, the raiders, they didn't have no technical men or anything. And they'd get a half track hung up on the beach or so, and they couldn't get it started, and they'd ask me. But I got a Marine outfit, camouflage, and I got rid of my tool sack. I carried my tools in an ammo box so the snipers wouldn't get me. So I'd run up and down the beach.
And why were the mechanics so coveted by the snipers? Sounds like you didn't want to be seen as a mechanic.
Well, the snipers would go for the mechanics and the officers. That was their main targets on the beach. The regular artillerymen and enlisted soldiers,
Secondary target.
secondary targets.
In other words, a mechanic could.
Mechanics that kept everything running and everything, those were the primary. And then the officers. I know we had one officer, everybody hated him. He was in the Marines, real. He had a pearl-handled revolver. And every guy was saying, I got dibs on that, anything happened to him. So it was a joke. But we took him in. And the next trip in, we took him back out. He was shot, dead. And he was missing his pearl-handled revolver, too.
Oh, boy.
So, see, the regular enlisted men, they either buried him on the beach or they'd come back and die aboard ship, and then we'd have a burial at sea. But he was a high-ranking officer, and so they decided they were going to ship him back. So they put him in the ship's freezer, where the captain and the exec kept their food. So they kept him in, and they couldn't lay him down because you couldn't get around him in their freezer. They sat him up, on some ice chests and whatnot in there. And we didn't have any blacks in the crew, but we did have Filipinos that would did the laundry and the cooking for the chief, not the chief, but the captain and the executive officer. In captain's quarters, they took care of just the captain and his needs and the exec officer. And they'd come down in the middle of the night or so, and they'd get some ice cubes or some drinks or so. So this playing cards down there close to the cooler because it was a little cooler there. And the quartermaster down there had the keys to the cooler. And this little Filipino come down. I don't know if he's Filipino or something. He was black. And he said he's from captain. He wanted some ice. So they opened the cooler and he's going in and get it. He went in and got it. And he ran in and he's eating this stiff there, propped up on the ice, frozen stiff, we're taking him back. He seen that guy, he almost had a fit. He come out, he thought he seen a ghost. I remember we made one run into Bougainville after that, or maybe more, from Espiritu, Santos, and the Fijis, and all over where we get supplies to supply the forces in there. And I come up out of the engine room one day, and I'm standing on the deck, and it is hot. We're only 3 degrees south of the equator, and it was over 100 degrees in the engine room all the time. So I come out to get some fresh air, and I'm standing on the deck and looking at the beach. And I hear something like a noise behind me, like a ding. I turn around and looked, and it's just a bulkhead there. So I didn't think anything of it, and I'm standing there. I heard another ding. I turned around and looked and didn't say anything. And then the third ding, I swear to God, something almost brushed my ear. And I turned around right away and looked, and there was a chip of paint fell off the bulkhead. Now look down, and there's these spent bullets from the sniper ashore He was shooting at me. So I went over to the other side of the ship to get some fresh air. I didn't go on the side of the ship that was facing the island anymore.
Wow, how far away was he?
Oh, right, within a mile ashore. We used to get in as close as we could see, so the runs back and forth unloading wouldn't be so bad. And it was pretty deep there. But see, after we got unloaded, you got 17, what was it, 17 foot, a draft? Let's see, what did I have on the draft in that? 27 feet. But you'd get down to maybe 10, 12 feet, when we were unloaded. So after we get unloaded, we could get closer as the load got off.
Right.
Sometimes it'd take us 3-4 days, depending on how high the surf was running, how tough it was to get over the reefs. But I was in the amphibious force, and we went the Inuiatak in Kwajalein. I think they were in the Marshall Islands, or Marshall or Gilbert, I forget now. And maybe I look here, and they were in a group of islands that would form these atolls. And these atolls would be like the cone of a volcano before it broke surface. They were all coral. They were only about 3 foot above sea level, and just outcroppings of coral. And it'd be shallow all around them, and you'd have this big circle of them. And there was only one entrance there. It was just a perfect rendezvous place, a big lagoon, about as big as Oneida Lake. And boats would go in there, and they'd have a minesweeper or a subtender or something at the entrance where the national entrance is. And if it wasn't deep enough, they'd throw some depth charges down there, blast the coral out of the way. So we could get cruisers and battle wagons in there, and then we'd be protected from the subs in there. And that's where the task force would group, and then we'd leave from there.
Plus it was calmer water, I assume, because it was a bit of a breakwater.
It was, Inuiatak was the southern one, I think Kwajalein was the northern one, and that's where we had the invasion. We went to Guam and Saipan and Okinawa, and that's where all the major invasions was. On the Clymer, I picked it up in New Caledonia, and it just come from North Africa. And it was a new ship when it went to North Africa. And it was in on that campaign. And then it came to the South Pacific, and Guadalcanal was the first campaign. It was over there, and I was on that one. And I stayed on that one until the last campaign, which was Okinawa. But Guam, we couldn't get a hospital ship. It was a Mercy ship. The Mercy ship was the hospital ship. Big ship with all white with a big red cross on it. And we couldn't get, for some reason, they couldn't get it wasn't available. So they ordered us to stay at Guam. And there was such fierce fighting at Guam, they couldn't set up the major hospital cases ashore. So we'd go and pick them up, bring them back, and these were all guys that had to be amputations, arms, legs, things like that.
Stop there for a minute and tell us a little bit about your thoughts. And I know you had mentioned McClurg as probably one of the more moving things for you, but what impact did it have on you to see all these men, or actually boys that were being very seriously injured?
Being young, you can absorb a lot. You got youth on your side for physical strength and everything, and you're not that smart when you're young. You don't realize that until you're older. And that was it. And you just had to suck it up. But I guess we could do that because most of it we lived through the Great Depression. And that was a traumatic experience because I know during the Depression we were always, even as kids, we worried about, are we going to live on the street? Are we going to be put out? You'd see families their furnishings being put out on the curb. And the families would disappear. And fathers wouldn't have a job. They were getting $17 a week working on the WPA. And there was no work or anything. And you're always worried about getting something to eat. I used to borrow the kids' wagon next door, and I had a wagon, and I'd tie the handle onto the axle of the other one. I'd have two wagons, and we'd walk 6 blocks to the A&P store. My mother would get both wagons loaded up as much as you could hold for $5. And that's how we lived. But you learned to do without during the Great Depression. And it was a tough time.
Yeah.
So I think that's how we made it through there. And then as kids, I never had any brothers or sisters defend me. I'd have a fight with a kid, and I'd just wait around because I knew his older brother was coming. I always had an older brother to fight. So I'd have one fight, I'd always have to have 2, 3 after that, until I get to the oldest one, and then he'd beat me up. But like I say, you don't know what you're pressed with or what you can endure until you have to do it. And you'd go and complain or anything, they'd just say, suck it up.
Yeah.
That was it.
You said after McClure, you had trouble sleeping. How long did it take you to get over that, or do you think about that from time to time still? Or?
For 3 days, I couldn't eat or sleep. And I just wandered around, and I was like in a trance, days. And then I just things got busy, and I buried myself in work, and I just shook it off, and I said, you got to keep going. So each invasion, Tinian and Saipan and Guam, I'd meet Bernie, because it seemed like we would pick up the 2nd Marine Raider Division, and I know most of the guys in the 2nd Marine Raiders, and then all their new replacements coming in. But after you lost a guy like that, McClure, I never did.
You wouldn't get close?
I wouldn't get close to anybody.
Yeah.
You couldn't do that. But I knew Bernie from high school, grammar school, and so I'd see him when he'd come aboard, and he looked like he was going to cave in. He was so sick and everything, but there was no relief because you were worn out or anything.
Right.
They were just cannon fodder.
Did you ever see any of the men that suffered from battle fatigue or just totally broke down, or what happened?
Yeah.
How did they handle that?
He just kept going. We didn't have any of this, what do they call it, post-traumatic stress
syndrome, yeah, PTSD.
PTSD, yeah. No, they didn't invent that yet before we were there.
Yeah, probably the same problem with a different name. You had it, they just didn't call it that back then.
Yeah. When we got, when I got out, I had high blood pressure. I was like this, and we all had that. And I know what the guys were going down through in the Guadalcanal, in the trails there, what they used to do is capture some guys, and they'd cut them up and hang up the arms and legs in the trails in the jungle to try to scare them.
Oh boy.
Well, some of the Marines says, well, good for the goose, good for the gander. So they'd go after the Japs with the long hair, and they'd cut their head off. And they get the broomsticks, and they stick them on the head of the broomstick and mount them as fender guides on the Jeeps and the trucks. Eleanor Roosevelt come down there, and they got her on a car going to the headquarters. She come down the road, and these guys come roaring along in a Jeep with these heads on there with the hair flowing. She looked at that, and she freaked out, and she went back to Roosevelt. And she said, while she was down there, she says, these soldiers are acting like cannibals. She says, when they come back, we got to intern them for 2-3 months to rehabilitate them. Well, Jesus, the guys went crazy. They said, after we get back, they're going to lock us up again. The hell they are.
Yeah, she's got some very famous quotes about her experiences with the Marines.
Yeah.
All along those lines.
Oh, boy. So that didn't go over good. I know they'd call in the Red Cross, They say, there's going to be some women coming. Oh, God. What kind of women? These are white women. We're going to see white women. So, we'd go about 9, 10 months, we wouldn't see a female. So they're going to fly them in. Well, they'd fly them in, and then the cooks would make donuts and coffee and set it up. Then these ladies would come out, or we'll call them ladies, they'd come out and they'd serve the donuts and the coffee. And then at night, they'd have a party in the officers' clubs. We'd be down in the boondocks looking up there, hearing the party and everything else. And then they'd have a great party that night, and then they'd get on the plane and fly off the next morning. That was the Red Cross. And see, we had a kid aboard George Clymer. His name was Paskachala. He was a Polish lad, and he loved to gamble. So towards the end of the war, we put him in San Francisco, and he gambled all his money away and everything else. He didn't have any money. So he gets all dressed up, and he got shore patrol, and he goes down to the USO, and they have a stand down there, a woman maintaining it, and it was Navy Relief. So he went up there and he says, I'd like to borrow $20. And you wouldn't ask the Red Cross because, see, if you had a death in the family and you were stateside, they'd give you a ticket to go attend the funeral. And you get that from the Red Cross. But then on the next payday, the cost of that ticket would be deducted from your pay. You always had to pay the Red Cross back. But the Navy Relief, if you got money from there, you wouldn't have to pay it back. So he goes down to the Navy Relief and he says, I'd like to borrow $20. The woman behind there, she says, $20? Well, what's it for, sailor? He says, well, to tell you the truth, he says, I've been at sea over 9 months, and I would just like to have a good time. She says, Navy Relief doesn't give money for sailors to have a good time. She says, but for being so truthful, she says, that's one of the best reasons I heard. She says, we'll see what we can do. So she reached in her purse, pulls out her checkbook, and writes a check out for $20. And she signed it, Mrs. Nimitz.
Yeah, interesting.
Admiral Nimitz's wife. So he comes back and he tells us the story. We said, where's the check? Let's see it. He said, well, I spent it. I said, you idiot. I said, you could have got $200 from the newspapers from that.
Oh,
didn't
sure.
You? I said, that was priceless. He said, yeah, but I had a good time with the 20.
Oh,
but when we went into Guam, we laid off there, and that was a tough one because they'd bring these guys in, and they brought some doctors in because all we had was a corpsman aboard ship. And the sick bay was about twice as big as this room, and it was full with cots. And these guys had all their arms and legs amputated. These guys were specialists in amputation. So then they'd move them out on the deck to get some sun and everything, you know. But some of these guys would try to fall out of their cots and things and roll over and go over the side. They wanted to commit suicide.
Oh, really?
So we had to put a watch up. We had deckhands. They put a watch so these guys wouldn't try to commit suicide. So every night we'd pick off Guam. We'd have to steam out into the current. They'd go around the island. And then we'd have these garbage cans full of arms and legs full of blood. We'd dump them over the side of the stern. And the water would just churn with the fish.
Eating
it. Then we'd go back in. Passageways from the sick bay over to the stern, you couldn't walk in them because that blood would go on the floor, and then it would get slippery, and then it would get tacky. So we have to throw buckets of salt down there so you get a little traction on that.
Oh, boy.
And that, all that blood and gore and everything every night, and throwing those over the side. So then, that was the longest we ever stayed at one place. And that was almost 3-4 weeks. And then they said, we got to clean up the place because we're taking 100 women back to Honolulu. Holy jeez, 100 women.
Where'd these women come from? Where were they?
I said,
Re-
so
Were they on Guam?
we ran down and we shining shoes and we got clean uniforms and everything. And I was even cutting hair. I mean, everybody was pressed into service. We got all cleaned up. And the boat they brought the women out and we looked at them. And these were from the sex slave camps that the Japanese ran.
Oh, really?
And the women cooked for them, the Japanese. They mended their clothes and done everything. But these, and they warned us, no catcalls or anything. We don't want any yelling or screaming when these women come aboard. The officers told us because they knew what commotion would be. We said, we're going to be at sea with 100 women aboard. Geez, the guys were everybody was all excited. Well, they marched them ashore. And the reason we were taking them off, all these 100 women were pregnant. And they had to get them there was no medical care there, see, for these pregnant women. So they wanted to get them to Honolulu so they could take care of them. And they come in board in rice sacks, just a hole cut out for the neck and bare arms, and just a rice sack down to here, almost to their knees. And they were just dirty. You couldn't tell if they were white or native or anything. There was English women that were in the colonies from Australia and everything. There was Chinese, there's Polynesian, Korean. They're all mixtures. And they were all pregnant. And so when they came aboard and we seen them, nobody said a word. It was quiet. Went down below, changed clothes, got back in our work uniform.
Well, and those women had been through a lot.
They've been through a lot.
Yeah.
So they were kept separately and no one tried to contact them.
Yeah.
And we got to Honolulu and they unloaded them.
Yeah. The Japanese are very noted for doing that a lot.
I thought about this and I said, all the time I was out there, 2.5 years, I didn't see any prisoners. You see Europe, they had all these prisoners, they had these prison camps and everything, you see movies about it. I don't remember. And I said, well, we had no place. We didn't have enough food. One day we were on rice for about 30 days. And I said, we didn't have enough food to feed prisoners. We didn't have any place to keep them. We didn't have any spare personnel to guard them. And we didn't have any prisoners.
Yeah. Well, the Japanese felt it was a dishonor to surrender.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okinawa was the biggest sea battle they ever had, an air battle. And we were in there 5 days. We got our troops ashore and everything, and we were hanging around, for casualties and whatnot. And the kamikaze attacks got worse every day, and they ordered us out because we didn't have any defenses.
Right.
But I think we were lucky because we were floating high. They knew we were empty. They wanted to save their targets for the military.
Did you see any other vessels get hit in that
Oh,
engagement?
yeah. Blasting all around us. I got pictures of it in here. The Lafferty was a picket ship. They formed a picket line with their destroyers and subchasers and smaller vessels around the island. And the farther out was the Lafferty. And that's where the kamikazes first picked up the ship. And the Lafferty, they had over 50 planes on their radar at one time coming in after them. I got the totals here. My grandchildren got after me, and I just wrote a book.
Show us the book for the camera. Just hold it up to the camera. A book that's authored by Dan. Okay. Tell us a little bit more.
Okinawa, they had something like 600,000 or 800,000 civilians on Okinawa. It was a big problem. And as the troops were advancing, they drove these civilians to the northern end of the island, and that was all sheer cliffs. And the Japanese had told them, if the Americans capture you, they'll torture you to death. Be a terrible death. So they were all running to the end of the island, and women with babies in their arms, they're jumping off the cliffs down to the rocks below, committing suicide. But the Japanese, I think they lost maybe 60,000 troops on that invasion. That was the biggest casualty of all the war. I think we lost something like 13,000 or 17,000. A lot more wounded. We lost over 300 to 400 ships.
Well, at this point, you're getting on Japanese soil.
Oh yeah, this was the last stepping stone. The next one was going to be Tokyo, Japan mainland. But when we went into Leyte, we went into Philippines first, and Okinawa came after that. But then it was Japan. There was, let's see, Guam, Saipan, hit Palau before that. But then we went into Leyte to do the Philippines. So we landed at Leyte that morning. We didn't get much opposition there. And the whole fleet was there, big fleet. And loaded that day. And as we were loading, they had a section of the beach roped off or pulled off, bamboo poles stuck in the sand. We weren't supposed to go there. And they had guys going along the beach checking the depth for potholes and everything. And it was a long slope coming in there, see? So we naturally we try to avoid that because you get hung up on a long slope. You wanted something that dropped off fast so you could get out. So they kept that roped off, and about 2, 3 o'clock the day of the invasion, everything was quiet ashore. They had this cruiser come in, and who comes ashore but MacArthur? We were on the beach, and we never seen so many cameramen. I think they had all of Hollywood out there, and it was just lined up with these movie cameras. And this, and then the guys told us, they said, MacArthur's coming in, and the water there, we can't land him anything over knee deep. It has to be knee below. And there was more staff there than you could shake a stick at, and everybody getting ready. So his boat pulls in, the trap door comes up, and he's standing there with the clay pipe and the pressed uniform and everything. And we called him the Peacock. And Nimitz and Pawsley, they hated him because he wouldn't commit any of his troops to the South Pacific until we secured the airfields in Manila. He had his Air Force, but he wouldn't bring them in until the airfields were secured. The Navy had to go inland and secure these airfields. So he came in late that day, and trap door opens up, and we're standing on the beach waiting. And he poses until all the cameras get in focus. Then they initialed, and then he stepped off. He was stiff as an old board. He waded ashore, you know, and then he'd stand there with the pipe and look around. And he had the former president of the Philippines with him. And they went up to the tree line where the palm trees were there. He gave his famous speech. We overcame, he was great for making speeches. And he gave that, and he stayed ashore for about 2 hours. Then he went back aboard the cruiser. Well, the second day, his staff was set up headquarters. Everything was set at headquarters, all set. So the second day, he did the same thing. Went ashore about an hour, looked around, got aboard, and went back. Well, see, he had the Filipino cooks and everything in his own servants there aboard. And he had an air-conditioned stateroom and everything in a modern cruiser. And he figured he'd stay there. So his staff was aboard, and he'd go ashore every day for about an hour and come back. So the fourth day, they asked him if he was going to stay ashore. He's considerate, So finally, we were getting ready for the invasion of Okinawa after the Philippines. So they told him, we need this line ship up to the front. So they said, we'll get you another ship. So he couldn't deny that. He had to release the ship, see. So the Navy took the ship away from them. They sent another ship. And this ship, I don't know. I didn't think they had anything afloat since the Civil War. But I think this was a hot ship. No air conditioning, no nothing. He went aboard. He looked at his quarters. He moved ashore after the fourth day.
The Navy sent him a message, I guess, didn't they?
But we got up to Manila, and he declared Manila open city. He didn't want any bombings because that's where all his wealth was. He owned a lot of buildings and businesses in
I
Manila.
didn't realize that.
So he didn't want that bombed. But, you know, they did otherwise. And the Navy figured if he wasn't going to help. So he wanted Manila just about secured before he releases forces from Australia to come up. So after the airfields were secure and everything, then he brought it up. And then we swept the islands. The Navy cleaned them out, the Marines and everything. And we got down to Zamboanga. That's the southernmost village in the Philippines. And it's a strange culture when you get into different tribes and nationality. And we went ashore, had a couple of other guys. We were walking along this trail, like just a dirt road. And there's a guy along the side, and he's got some bushes there, you know, and he motions us over, and we went over. And we were given a carton of cigarettes every week, the sailors were. And it was like a ration. In the great tobacco companies, you know, they're working their magic and to get us addicted. And I being a swimmer all the time, that would cut your breath down, and I didn't like the taste of it, so I didn't smoke. But I get the cigarettes because money wasn't worth anything out there. They didn't know what money was. It was all barter and trade. So I go ashore with those carton of cigarettes. You get a lot for a carton of cigarettes. So I go ashore, and this guy calls us over, and he had looked like about a 12-year-old girl with him. He points to the girl. He points to cigarettes, and he goes like that. He wanted one carton for that girl. I looked at him, a little skinny, dirty girl there, about 12. And we looked at him, and by sign language and everything else, we figured he was the father of this girl. He was trying to sell her for trouble, you know, for a carton of cigarettes, a carton of cigarettes. So we said no, but I see he had a pair of channel lock pliers with him. We had regular pliers, but channel locks was a prize. Mm-hmm. And so I pointed to the pliers. He said no. Offered him a carton of cigarettes. He hesitated. He said 2. I had 2 cartons in my shirt. I took them out. Gave both cartons. And he gave me the channel locks. So I took them, and we slapped him on the side of the head, and they said, take her home.
Pretty good. Pretty good. What goes on in a Higgins boat as they approach a real battle?
Yeah. The night before, we usually made a landing. We'd make the landings early morning. And we'd always try to make the landings on the windward side of the mountain, because the leeward side of the mountain, the tropics, people think of the vacation and the nice palm trees and the nice waters and everything. The tropics, they're all hellholes. And if you swim on the leeward side, that's where the current goes around, and that's where all the trash, and that's where all the bad fish gather, and the Portuguese man of war, the jellyfish that sting you and everything. And the salt concentration is the highest there. And it's all the parasites. We were pulling boats off the reef, salvaging them during the invasion, and I had swim fins in, and I'd swim in to put the tow lines on, and then I'd get aboard the boat, and we'd try to start it. A lot of times that the shafts would be bent, and the engines would be seized up, and we couldn't get the power on the boat. We'd have to tow it out. We'd spend all day in the water. And when we'd come back, they'd put eardrops in your ear. And I come back one day, I was exhausted. I just couldn't move. And I got back aboard ship, and I went right down, hit my bunk, and I was out. I woke up about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had this terrible earaches, and it was something like it was eating on my eardrum. And what happened, the closest thing I can assimilate to was like having athlete's foot on your eardrum, that itching and everything. I went to sick bay, and he told me, he says, you got a fungus growth on your eardrum because you didn't come in and get the drops after you've been in the water all day. So he says, we're going to have to scrape your eardrums. I says, that doesn't sound like too good of a procedure. I says, what's it involved? He says, you'll never feel a thing. I'll guarantee you won't feel anything. I said, well, go ahead. So I sat there. He put this instrument in my ear, and the first stroke to scrape the eardrum to get the fungus off there, it was like he shot me in the head. I passed out completely.
Wow.
And I woke up, I had 2 earaches, but it wasn't that itchy clawing feeling. It was just a tense earache on both ears. And the blood was running out of both my ears, and he put gauze on it and everything, and he says, now, we'll give you a light duty slip for 24 hours so you don't have to turn to work. So he says, until you try to heal again. But I got my eardrops after that. You never want to. But the islands, it is all dirt and filth.
Lots of things growing that you don't want.
There's animals you never see. I thought I was getting delusional. I was sitting there, and it's all water, pools of water around and everything, and I see a lizard about 6 inches long, and he runs right across the top of the water. I look at that, and these lizards got like suction cups on them, and they run on the top of the water. Naturally, you don't see any like that in the States,
Yeah.
but there's all sorts of snakes and spiders and bugs and a lot of the natives down there. I thought this one native, he's really Irish. He had like a afro head of hair, but it was all green. And he'd come up along in a dugout canoe when we were unloading, and they have these Coca-Cola bottles that are so worn they're almost white because they're all scratched up. They got a vine tied around them, and it's fermented. It's what do they call it? Suba or something. It's fermented coconut juice in there. It's like alcohol. Mm-hmm. And he was trying to sell that. And when he got up closer, I looked down, and here it was like moss growing in his on his head. It was like a green, and these were green scabs.
So he must never washed his hair?
No. They don't wash, because the problem is, if you wash and you get clean, the bugs leach up alive. But they got such a body, they never wash, and there's such a body odor, and the oil's coming out of them, all that seafood and fishy smell, that the bugs won't attack them.
Interesting.
I went back for the 50th anniversary to ski all the South Islands in New Zealand. And my wife and I were coming back from Aspen for spring skiing, and she says, I'm tired of this cold weather, ski. She says, I want to go someplace where it's warm. So I said, well, take a summer vacation. She said, I want to go south. So I said, okay. So just before we left, I said, you better grab your ski gear in case we need it. She said, I thought, we're going south. So then I told her we're going to New Zealand. The weather is opposite, you know. So we went and skied South Island. I always wanted to see South Island, because South Island is like back in the 50s. You know, they got electricity. They got one bulb hanging down on a cord from the ceiling, and that's it. No shades or nothing.
So take us back. I really would like to know what you observed as a crewman on a Higgins boat, the behavior and the tension and the psychology of the men who were facing that beach landing. Talk about that.
We'd pick up different loads of troops, and I don't care if they're Marines or infantry or what. And there's all different types of nationalities and people from different parts of the country. And some guys are, especially with the young guys, you know, macho and everything else, you know, and weightlifting, working out, you know, and tough guys. But when the night before, everybody stay up late, get ready for the landing, inspect their gear and everything. We had this one guy, Rusty Welsh, this Irish kid from Boston. He had that long A accent, you know. He'd always say, I hope there's not any sharks in that water. And they issued us carbines, about 30-aughts, a short one for jungle fighting, so you could swing them around. And Rusty's in there, and we're cleaning the guns, and he's got one of these little pitch shovels, you know, dig foxholes with. And he's got a file, and he's sharpening the edge of it. I said, what do you think you're going to do with that? We hit that beach. I'm going to dig a hole so deep and jump in it. No one's going to get me. He had that Boston accent. And I said, how deep you going to go? He said, well, I'll stop when I see a Chinaman. He told me. But a lot of guys would go to church services before we'd hit the beach. But when we get down on the landing boats, even the toughest guys, there would be no joking, pushing, or anything else, joking around. No one would talk. And a lot of guys would have rosary beads out saying the rosary. Some guys would have a prayer book out. And some guys had their head bowed until they were praying. And some guys would mess their pants. Some guys would just shake uncontrollably. And no one would say anything. And different emotions would evolve. And we were in the boat and we'd see this one after a load of the other. A lot of these guys, the first time they were major invasion, first time they hit the beach, they had a landing boat. But we were in and out all day. And we'd get used to it. But even the tough guys started to pray. Yeah.
That brings up a good point. How did the war affect your faith, if at all? I mean, did you think about that much when you...
I went to a Roman Catholic Irish grade school. And they had sisters there, nuns. And I guess they were the Sisters of Mercy. I don't know how they ever got that name, because they weren't merciful. They would slap you around, and they had a pointer. They would pin you against the desk with the pointer right in your shoulder. And if you didn't pay attention or anything, you had to hold out your hand. They'd take a ruler and they'd slap your hand, and it'd be red the rest of the day. But they'd get physical. They'd really beat you. And you had to learn your catechism, all memory, your tables, multiplication, everything else. But it doesn't affect you so much. But when I started working with a lot of cancer survivors, people, when they face their mortality, they get wounded or something, and outside conversation doesn't affect them. They get in their own world. And they start praying, they start talking to God. And that's where religion does you the most, when you get at the end of the line. And I know, being over 90 now, and I've been in 3 cancers. I got 128 radioactive seeds in me. I lost my right kidney cancer. And I've been in and out of the hospital a lot, emergency rooms. And when you're laying there, I've never been a real religious person. And I know some priests and things say, why don't you come to church more often? And I say, when I wanted to talk to God, I never had to call up for an appointment. I never had to talk to a secretary or anything. I said, I just call him and I can get a direct line right to him then and there. And I says, that's how I communicate. But I made some promises. After my second cancer, I said, I'm not going to work, chase the bottom line anymore. I got rid of a lot of my toys, airplane, boats, and whatnot, second homes. And I volunteer. Because a lot of people say, well, why'd you put so many hours in volunteering? I said, I do that because I'm selfish. Because when you volunteer, maybe 1 out of 100 will come back and thank you, but it makes you feel so good. I said, that's why you volunteer.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So as we march through the battles, are there any other battles that you were involved in that you'd like to discuss before we move to what's next?
Well, there was one battle in one place we never wanted to get in any trouble. It wasn't an invasion or battle, and that was the Fiji Islands. The Fijis are a proud people, and about 10, 12 years ago, they had a real military coup down there because the Indians come in and took over all the businesses. They got into parliament and everything. So the military come in, and there's a rule now that no outsider can work unless all the Fiji people are working. And they got their choice of any job they want down there. So they got the whole tourist industry and everything else. So when we went ashore in Fiji's to pick up a load or transfer out of there, move things up the line, they got policemen there. The policemen, I guess the minimum height is about 6'4" or so, all about 250 pounds. They go barefooted. They wear a short skirt. They got a big pouch on their side. And we were unloading supplies, and so none of the natives would come and steal out of the loading nets and everything. They got these Fiji police stationed there. There was one stationed up on top of our deck, and he was watching the laborers load the ship. And I was watching, and he reached in this leather pouch. He took some raw tobacco leaf, and he folded it up, and he just ground it in his hand. He got it fine, and then he put it in another leaf and rolled it up. He had a cigar, about an inch or two diameter, about that long, and then he lit it, and he smoked it. And it smelled like tires burning or something. It was really potent. And he smoked it down to a short stub. When he got through with it, he looked at it, and then he threw it down on the steel deck, and then he put it down out with his bare foot. And they had the bottom of their feet, they had a callus on it. I think on my Nike sneakers I got, the sole is about that thick. And they were tough as can be. And they carried a hardwood club about that long, and it was shaped like a diamond. And if you said anything, they just, one action, the arm would come up and they'd slap you on the side of the head with that club. It could knock you silly. But if they ever hit you with the edge of it, they would break a bone. And they told us before we went ashore, they said, don't ever have a confrontation with a Fiji policeman, because you'll come back to the ship on a stretcher. They were tough.
Interesting part of the culture. When you interacted with various locals in different places you were at, how did they treat you generally, or was there very different kind of?
Well, a lot of the locals were natives. There was no communication. New Guinea was just, they weren't civilized. Usually we didn't go ashore in those places. There was no place to go. Get up on the beach, and you'd be on the beach, and the damn no-see-ums would come out, these sand fleas. After 4 o'clock, the beach gets cool. Eat you alive. And we'd rather be back aboard ship.
Yep.
But when we went ashore in Manila, they wouldn't leave us go ashore unless we had 2 canteens of water. They told us, don't drink or eat anything here.
Mm-hmm. That bad. Okay. Now, did you want to talk more about Okinawa, was it? I believe you said you wanted to discuss that a little more.
Okinawa, I got the list of casualties and everything in this little book I wrote, and I got it from that Samuel L. Morrison's history. But the thing that affected me in Okinawa, After we were completed the task force and we were pulling the troops out, see, the 2nd Marines would go in and they'd be the blunt force. And then when they were in there about 2 or 3 weeks, they'd get depleted. They'd pull those back, and then the reserves would come in and fill their ranks. So the 2nd Marines, they were beat up and they'd have to bring them out. So we were picking up the 2nd Marines. So I thought, I was waiting for Bernie because I was going to fill his goodie bag up and everything. And I seen these guys from the 2nd Marines. I knew them all. And I said, hey. And after the invasion, the normal greeting was, I see you made it. You know. And they'd say, yeah, and everything, and be joking around. We were laughing and everything. And I says, did you see Bernie? And a few of them looked the other way and no one said a word. Well, I knew what happened right away. And so there was a dead silence for there a while and no one would look at me. And so I said, how'd he get it? So one of them says, well, we didn't see it, but the rumor was he got run over by a tank. I said, oh, Jesus. So that was his last campaign. After Okinawa, we went back. We were at Eniwetok as a stopover, and trying to keep the ship in one piece because it was falling apart. And we were the APAs and the cargo ships. They were the only ones that could make fresh water. And the LST and the LCIs and all the other amphibious ships, they just had tanks, but they didn't have any evaporators to make fresh water. So at a place like Eniwetok, they tell us to run the evaporators full blast, and we'd get full tanks, then we'd run up a black ball. And that meant we got water, come and get it. Well, there was 2 LSTs, one off our starboard port and one off our starboard stern. And so we're parked here. The one off the starboard side here, broadside, he started heading straight forward towards us. And the other one off our stern, he starts coming in. Well, the right of way, the guy that's in the first quadrant, at 0 to 90 degrees, he's got the right of way. So he kept coming, so the guy on stern dropped back. So he figured he's going to be first to get the water and take all the water he could. Maybe we didn't have that much. So he starts making his turn. Well, you know, an LST is about 400 to 600 feet long, and it's like a big saucer, and it's not too maneuverable. So he couldn't make the turn. So he made the turn, with his side slippage and everything. He didn't complete the turn. He come in and rammed us right into the side. Well, he took out the whole side of the lower deck there, and that was our chow, the galley where we ate. So all the way back, we had open air dining. I mean, we'd go in there and stand there. About 3 or 4 below was the water line, and you could have put a 40-foot boxcar through that hole. The hole he tore in the side, right through the steel. Caved us all in. So we went to Pearl, and they welded some big plates on it, so if we hit any rough water. And then they ordered us San Francisco to be refitted. So I thought, boy, oh boy, I says, we're going to get back to San Francisco. We had been out maybe 9 months a year at that time without getting Liberty or anything, so I thought, Liberty at last. So that morning we lined up for muster, and I was told to fall out and go to the ship's office and there was some orders waiting there for me. And I went down to the ship's office, and it says you're to proceed immediately to disembark the ship as soon as we dock, and there'd be a Jeep waiting there to take you to your new assignment. So I went and asked the chief, I says, what's going on? And he says, they put out an order, and it went to the whole fleet, and they said they wanted an experienced first-class electrician that also passed the chief's test. And they said, with sea duty and battle duty, combat duty. So I guess you're it. So I got off the ship. I went down and packed, and I got off the ship, and the whole electrical gang got to wave me off. And I went down and got in the Jeep, and I said, where are we going? The guy says, right the next dock over. So drove through the Navy Yard, went the next dock, and pulled it up the ship, and it looked like a destroyer would set low in the water. There was no gangway. I walked right off the dock, and the main deck was right off the dock, just about 4 or 5 feet above the waterline. And as soon as I got on and I handed him my papers, he looked at the papers and he rings up the bridge and he says, he's here. And he hung up. So we called the seaman and he says, show him down to the chief's quarters. So just then an announcement come over the speaker, says, prepare to get underway. So they set the sea watch into cast off and start steaming out through San Francisco Bay from Oakland over to the Bay Area. And I went down, asked the chief, and he says, go down to choose quarters, get yourself some chow, and I'll see you in the morning. So I said, okay. So I went down, picked out a bunk, and went and had some chow, and then I went topside, and I could see the Golden Gate Bridge just fading away. And I said, geez, I come in the morning, I'm going out in the afternoon, I didn't even get an hour ashore. So
What vessel was this now?
USS Gasconade.
Okay.
And it was a newly commissioned ship. And it was a diesel electric. It had twin screws. And it was, I had the specs written down. It was 6,000 horsepower, but it was 1/3 the tonnage the George Clymer was on. It was a light ship, fast. It was 426 foot long, 58 foot of draft, a 16 foot of draft, 58 foot in beam. Top speed was almost 17 knots. And it had one 5-inch gun, and it had 4 twin 40s. Now, twin 40s, we used to call them the Chicago pianos. These are 40 millimeters, and they'd pump, boom, 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 like this. And all you'd see is black in the sky. They had a clip of 6 shells that were about 50 caliber, a big slug. And there'd be in clips, and there'd be feeders on both sides, and the guys would be feeding these clips in. As fast as you could feed these clips in, they'd fire them. And it just kept like an automatic, just kept going. And the whole sky would be black where they explode. And
They were shooting at aircraft? What was their mission?
well, yeah, that was incoming aircraft we shoot at. And then they had 10 20 millimeters. The crew was only 322, and they'd carry about 850 troops. But these were assault. They're fast in, fast out. And this was made for the invasion of Japan.
About what year was this? You remember? What was the time, the date?
It was around August, September of 45, I think.
Well, the bomb was dropped in August of 45.
August 45. All right, it was, this was about 2-3 weeks, maybe a month before Japan surrendered. So we went out on that and stopped at Wetak and everything. And the task force got ready for the invasion of Japan. And then we steamed over just north of Okinawa because this is the closest we could to Japan. And they had the task force form out there, and we were practicing the invasion of Okinawa. And then we got a rumor that Japan had surrendered. And then they said they didn't surrender. We didn't know that there was a military coup going on in Japan. And the premier and Tojo and all them that were the top-ranking officials, they wanted to surrender, and the military said, no, we're not going to surrender. So the military was going to take over the government. And I guess there was some battle in the palace there, and a couple of the insurgents got killed, but they finally agreed to surrender. So we really didn't believe it. But then we formed a big flotilla. We went up to Japan, and we were going to go, it's like an inland sea. It's like the bay. Japan is like on the inland side. Tokyo is on the inland side. And we went up Kobe or Yokohama, I don't remember the exact location, but we got outside the harbor, and they flew over and everything, and they said the harbor's heavily mined. So we had a screen around the battleship Missouri so that wouldn't get torpedoed, because we didn't trust them, no matter what they said. So that morning we were standing out, we were lingering. The ships were, when we say standing out, that means we're hoving to, holding our position outside. So I got called up, the officer of the day, and he says, you're going ashore to pick up a pilot, harbor pilot, so we can know where the mines are so we can get in. So I said, I'm going ashore. He said, yeah, you take two of the guys, Marines, and he says, they'll be the bodyguards. He said, but don't let him shoot the pilot. He's a Jap, so don't let him shoot him. I said, why me? You don't want to risk an officer. I'm just an enlisted man. You gotta go. No, he'd be all right. So we got in this little mail boat and shoved off and skimmed in there. It only drew about 3 inches of water. And we hugged the shoreline, the docks, and there wasn't anybody out, no sign of life at all. We go along these docks and everything. We get back in there quite a ways, official-looking building, and I said, pull up here. It's pulled out, and I got out of the boat, and the two Marines got out with me, and we start walking down this dock, and all of a sudden the door opens up, and a Japanese guy steps out with a naval officer on it with a high collar, all in blue, navy blue, and a little hat, and he walks out and does a little bow there. He's about 30 feet ahead of me, and right away the Marines, I hear the safeties go off on the PA. I said, wait, no, take it easy. So I went up to him, and he bowed, and he gave me a typewritten paper. I took it, looked, and introduced him. He said he was the harbor pilot, and he would show us safe passage into the harbor. So I motioned him to come with us. So he got there, and the Marines on each side of him. And I walked ahead and led the way, went back, and we got in the boat. We got in the boat, and the Marines are on each stern. The Marines are sitting there with their guns, and I'm sitting on the bench's side, and he sits alongside of me, and we shove off, and the coxswain of the boat starts to drive back to the ship. He turns to me and he says, how's things in Frisco? I you speak English? He said, oh yeah. I graduated from UCLA. So he says, but I was a citizen of Japan, so war started, they called me back. So right away the Marines got real agitated. So I told him, I says, better knock it off. I says, wait till we get aboard ship. So I told the Marines, I kept going like that to them, and they were ready to kill him right then and there, So we got back aboard ship, and I said, follow me, and I went up the gangway, and he come up the gangway beside me, and I turned over to the officer of the deck, and he had them escorted up to the bridge. And that was the end, fine. But then he took us in, and we found a safe package, and minesweepers come in and cleaned it up a little, path in, and then the Missouri come in. And then right after noon or so, the launch come out with the Japanese with their black coat tails and everything, formal wear. And Wainwright was there, and National MacArthur was there. And they had Nimitz and all the Navy brass and everything. And I got a picture of it in my book.
Were you on which vessel?
I wasn't on the Missouri. I was on the USS Gasconade, and we were right alongside of. We were the screen in case a torpedo was shot. We'd get it instead of the
take the bullet.
Missouri. Yeah. But we could.
So you could see.
You could see the signing of it. It was right over there.
Oh, interesting. That's got to be quite a memory.
It didn't impress me so much. I think what really bothers me, when I think about McClure and Bernie Harlan, even to this day it affects you. You got to think about something else. But the thing that really affected all of us, we were in a Weetalk in the lagoon, and either coming off a campaign or something. I think it was August or something around that year. And you lose track of time out there. Time didn't mean anything to us. The month or anything was all the same. And we got notice that Roosevelt died. And that affected everybody. Because all during the Depression, things would be really bad. And we'd always say, well, don't worry, Roosevelt will fix it. So he come out, the first relief program. He started the CCCs, conservation, because guys didn't have no work. He started the WPA. He started all the social programs. And Social Security and all these things that came out, he started. And so, since we were kids, could remember anything until we were in service. He was the president. We didn't have any other presidents. And he was it. But when he died, we really felt bad.
Yeah.
But a lot of things happened in all the years.
Yeah.
When you look back, you got a lot of time to think, I say to people that get over 90, you shouldn't have anything in your bucket list. If you haven't done it by then, it's your fault. Because the only thing you got to dwell on to think about is your past memories.
As we are now in the reflections part of the interview, how did your wartime experience affect your life, do you think? How are you different than if you hadn't been at war? Have you ever imagined that?
Well, what really changed my life, I really didn't realize the training I got and the experience I got being an electrician. I was going to be an engineer, and I liked architectural work. But after I got older, I realized that in those days, you didn't get to be an architect unless your father was an architect. And I was in the wrong social circle to be an architect. So I was an electrician, and when I come back, I was going to go back to college. And I met with some of the guys, kids just getting into college, and I had three years in service, 2.5 years of sea duty, and I didn't quite fit in with these kids. I had grown up quite a bit since then. And the experience is kind of harden you. So I thought, I got to go back in that fraternity, and they're going to beat me with a paddle or something. I know that's not going to happen. So I went back to GM, and they said, well, look at there's a 2-year wait to get into school. So I didn't know what to do. I went home and I thought, well, maybe I could take a little vacation. So I rode out to a plant that was Alcoa had. It was a rolling mill for aluminum. And Reynolds Metals had bought the place, and they were advertising for machinists and tradesmen. So he had borrowed a car, and he was going to go out there. It was McCook, Illinois, and he was going to put an application in. He said, "Want to go along for the ride?" And I didn't have nothing to do, so I said, "Okay." So I went along for a ride, and we get out there, and he puts his applications filling out, and the secretary there says, "Would you like an application?" I said, "No." "You working?" I said, "No." She said, "You going back to school?" I said, "Well, yeah, but I got a 2-year wait." She said, "Were you in service?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "What'd you do?" I said, "I was a Navy electrician." She said, "You were a Navy electrician?" She says, "Don't leave. Don't leave." So she calls up the phone. She says, "There's one in the office right now." I see a guy running over from another building. And he's I'm the plant superintendent here. He says, "We got about 40 electricians here." He says, "We're trying to put, this place has been mothballed for 6 months or so after the war. We're going to put it back in production." He says, "You know anything about DC motors?" I said, "Oh, yeah." I said, I was on a ship over 2 years, all DC. DC? He said, "What do you know about DC?" I said, "Rewind a commutator." He says, I says, "Excite the motors, undercut the commutator." I says, "Seat the brushes." And I says, "Use an oscilloscope to bring the generators online." And he said, "You could do that?" "Oh, yeah." He said, "What rate were you at?" I told him I was chief electrician. "Oh." He says, "Well, when could you start?" I start what? He said, "You're going to work here. We want to hire you." So I says, "I don't know." He says, "It's 134 electricians." I said, "Oh, I don't belong to 134. And that's the strongest trade union in Chicago, in the country, in fact. So you can't get there unless your father or grandfather's been in that union." And he says, "If you know DC current, we can get you 134. So I said, "Okay." And I said, "How would I start?" And he says, "Well, you start at union wages." This back in '46, and it was over $10,000 a year. That's like $60,000, $80,000 now. So I said, "Okay." So that's how I started, and I started electrician there, and I made foreman, then I made chief electrician in the city of Chicago. Then I went into contracting business, and I got involved with a plastic company working for there. And the owner made me plant manager, and then I started putting satellite plants around the country. We called them turnkey operation. And I come up to Syracuse and put a plant up here and stayed here. So that's how.
Pretty big impact on your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to get out of Chicago because I had 2 boys, and Chicago is not the place to raise children. You can learn the trade there and learn it good, but try to operate a business there, it's a tough environment.
This interview will be viewed by people many years from now after we're all not here, and I'm wondering what kind of a message you'd like to leave for the future, possibly young kids that are thinking of enlisting or politicians that are considering sending young men and women to war. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my thought is, I look back, and I was in manufacturing. I did everything in plastics. I made the first plastic cigarette lighter before Bic ever came out. It was all plastic. And I made the radioactive isotope carriers for Canada for their nuclear program. And I did all the penicillin packaging for Bristol here and started up in Europe. And I also did some silly things like a player piano for Liberace. It was a toy like. And a fellow owned Morris Horowitz. He was a big financier. He owned Seaboard Finance. He owned all the warehouses across here. He was the RCA distributor and the Wheel Horse distributor. He owned Morse Distributing Company. And he's the guy that started the Lafayette Country Club. And And I look at all that things and I say, what did I do in my life to serve mankind, to give back? Because if you just come and exist and suck off the system, you're just a liability and you're not contributing anything. And humanity is going to get ahead. So whatever you can contribute, I think that's what counts. And I think after you retire, you look back and just say, what did I accomplish? And I look back at these wars now. We're not accomplishing a damn thing. We're still getting guys killed. We're not changing cultures. We go over to Afghanistan and Europe. In 2 years, you think we're going to introduce capitalism? They've had for centuries. They're tribal people, and they got their own customs. We can't try to impose our customs on him. There's too many people telling other people how to vote, what church to go to, do this and do that. If everybody would do what they're supposed to do themselves, it'd be a lot easier.
Okay. Is there anything else you think that we haven't discussed that we should add to the interview? That's really an open forum for you to leave whatever message you desire.
There's an old Irish saying, everybody has to carry their own hide to the marketplace. And I don't think I'm smart enough to leave any great messages or anything. But I think you don't have to be a genius. I think you just have to be smart enough to know how dumb you are.
Interesting. Well, as a witness to war, you've traveled far and seen much, and a grateful nation thanks you for your service.
Okay, thank you.
The interviewer is Joseph Messineo. The videographer is Dick Calagiovanni.